Humans never forgive. The warning was ignored. They thought there'd be no consequences. They were wrong. The alarm started before I even opened my eyes. A deep, pulsing sound that shook the walls of my quarters on New Haven Colony. I rolled out of bed and hit the floor running, pulling on my boots as the whole building shuddered around me. Outside my window, the sky over the grain fields was on fire. I am Ethan Cole. On that morning, I was nothing special, just a communications aide assigned to the human delegation on New Haven, one of our newest colonies, built in a quiet system we shared with a species called the Vrayl Assembly. We had signed trade agreements with them only 4 months earlier. We thought we were being good neighbors. I burst out of the dormitory and into chaos. Vrayl warships, sleek and dark, hung low over the colony, their engines throwing long shadows across the fields. People were running in every direction. Children were crying. Somewhere near the grain silos, a support beam collapsed with a sound like thunder, sending a cloud of dust into the morning air. I saw Lena Marsh before I saw anything else that mattered. She was a field engineer, someone I had shared 100 meals with in the colony hall, and she was pulling 2 small children away from a burning storage building, shouting for them to keep moving, don't look back. I ran toward her, my heart hammering, my mind screaming that none of this should be happening. We had a treaty. We had shaken hands. "Ethan," she called out when she saw me, "get to the shelters. They're targeting the comm tower." As if her words had summoned it, a beam of white light cut down from one of the ships above and struck the communications tower at the center of the colony. The tower folded in on itself and came down in a shower of sparks. The screen in my hand, still connected to the tower's network, went black. We were cut off from the rest of humanity in an instant. I helped Lena get the children into the underground shelter, and we stayed there for 6 hours while the attack continued above us. I remember the sound most of all. Not screaming, though there was some of that. Mostly it was the deep groan of buildings falling and the strange, almost musical whine of Vrayl energy weapons passing overhead. I remember holding a little girl's hand while she asked me, over and over, when her mother was coming. When the attack finally stopped, we climbed out into a colony that no longer looked like home. The main hall was gone. The medical center had lost half its roof. Smoke drifted over broken streets, and in the distance, the Vrayl ship simply sat there, unmoving, as if daring anyone to respond. Nobody did. Not that day. 3 days later, I stood behind Admiral Nora Whitfield in a meeting chamber aboard a neutral station, chosen by the Vrayl Assembly themselves for the talks that followed. I had been pulled from New Haven because I spoke enough of the Vrayl trade language to assist with translation, and because, as my superiors put it, I had seen it firsthand. I did not feel lucky to be there. I felt hollow and angry and very far from home. The Vrayl delegation arrived, led by a tall, thin being named Doran Vex, who held the title of Speaker for the Outer Circle. His skin had a faint silver sheen, and his voice, when it came through the translation device, was smooth and unbothered, like a man discussing the weather. "We regret the loss of life," Speaker Vex said, though nothing in his tone suggested regret. The colony was found to be in violation of a boundary agreement. Corrective action was necessary. I felt my jaw tighten. There had been no boundary violation. We all knew it. This was about resources, about the mineral deposits beneath New Haven that the Vrayl Assembly had wanted for themselves and had been unable to negotiate away from us through normal trade. Admiral Whitfield did not raise her voice. She was a compact woman with steady gray eyes, and she had a way of speaking that made every word feel weighed and measured before it left her mouth. "There was no violation," she said. "You destroyed a civilian colony because you wanted what was under it. 41 people are dead. Hundreds more have lost their homes." Speaker Vex made a small gesture with one long hand, something between a shrug and dismissal. Casualties of this scale are regrettable, but common in territorial disputes. We have conducted similar corrections with the Orloon Cluster, the Sane Assembly, and 3 smaller species along the outer rim. None have required further discussion. I assumed humanity would understand the practical realities of galactic life. I watched Admiral Whitfield's face. She did not blink. She did not look away. "I am going to say this once, Speaker Vex," she said, "and I want you to understand that I am not speaking out of anger. I am speaking as a fact. What you did will not be forgotten. There will be consequences for New Haven, and they will be proportional to what you have done. This is not a threat. It is a warning, and I am only giving it to you once." The chamber went quiet. Then Speaker Vex laughed, a strange rattling sound that the translation device rendered as something close to human laughter, though colder. "Consequences," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Admiral, I have studied your species since your first radio signals reached our listening posts. You have no standing fleet capable of contesting Vrail space. Your technology, while clever, is decades behind ours. You have been a spacefaring civilization for less than a century. I mean no insult when I say this, but you are in no position to speak of consequences to anyone." Another Vrail delegate, younger and less composed, leaned toward Speaker Vex and said something in their own tongue that the translator caught only partially, something about human volatility, about caution. Speaker Vex waved the concern away without even looking at him. "Humans are known for strong words," he said, turning back to Admiral Whitfield. "Strong words and short memories. You will trade with us again within the year, because you need the resources we control, and because there is nothing else you can do. I do not say this to wound you. I say it because it is simply true." I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell him that he had no idea what he had just done, that he had mistaken patience for weakness, that there was a difference between a species that forgets and a species that waits. But it was not my place, and Admiral Whitfield did not need my help. She simply looked at Speaker Vex for a long moment, long enough that even his composure seemed to flicker. "You'll trade with us again," she agreed quietly, "but not within the year, and not until this is settled." The meeting ended shortly after. There were no more words exchanged, no handshakes, no formalities. The Vrail delegation left first, moving with the unhurried confidence of a species that had never once been made to answer for what it had taken. I walked with Admiral Whitfield back toward our shuttle in silence. It was not until we were alone in the corridor that I finally spoke. "Do you think he believed you?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, watching the stars through the long viewport that ran along the station's outer wall. "No," she said finally, "he didn't. Most of them never do. The first time." She glanced at me, and for just a second, something passed behind her steady eyes, something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but close to both. "That's fine, Ethan. We're not in a hurry to convince him. We only need him to remember, later, that he was told." I did not understand what she meant. Not fully, not that day. I was still thinking about the little girl in the shelter, asking when her mother was coming home. I did not know yet what our government, our fleet command, and people far above my rank had already begun setting into motion the moment New Haven's tower went dark. I only knew that Admiral Whitfield had made a promise in that chamber, calmly, without a single raised word, and that promises made that quietly are usually the ones people keep. Speaker Vex returned to his ships convinced he had heard the last of it. He was already planning his next move against a small mining outpost near the Seine border, already certain that humanity, like every other species he had tested, would simply learn to live with its loss and move on. He had no idea that somewhere far behind our lines, shipyards that had been quiet for years were beginning to hum with new activity, and that the warning he had laughed at in that chamber was not the end of the conversation. It was only the beginning. 6 weeks after the meeting on the neutral station, I was reassigned. Fleet Command pulled me from diplomatic support and placed me in a small office buried 3 levels below the surface of Halden Base, humanity's largest shipyard complex. My new job was simple on paper: monitor communications traffic between our outposts and flag anything unusual. In practice, I quickly realized I had been given a window into something much larger than routine surveillance. The first thing I noticed was the noise. Not sound exactly, but activity. Supply manifests moving through my terminal showed shipments of rare alloys heading to construction bays that, according to the public registry, did not officially exist. Personnel transfers listed engineers and pilots being moved to postings with vague designations like Site 9 and Site 14. None of it was hidden from me because I had clearance, but none of it was explained either. I simply watched the pieces move and tried to understand the shape they were forming. On the surface, everything about our relationship with the Vrail Assembly looked completely normal. Trade ships still passed through the checkpoints along our shared border. Vrail merchants still haggled over grain prices in our outposts. A junior Vrail diplomat named Kessa Oren even visited Halden Base once, smiling through the translation device, remarking on how efficient our facilities looked, never once noticing the restricted section 2 kilometers beneath her feet, where half the base's real work was happening. I asked my supervisor, a quiet man named Grant Ashby who had transferred from military intelligence, why we were being so patient, why we were smiling at people who had burned our colony. Because patience is the only thing they don't expect from us, he told me one evening as we reviewed shipping logs together in the dim light of the office. They think loud means strong and quiet means weak, so we let them believe what they want to believe, right up until the moment it stops mattering what they believe. I thought about Admiral Whitfield's words in that chamber. We only need him to remember, later, that he was told. It was around this time that I learned Lena Marsh's name had appeared on the final casualty list from New Haven. I had assumed, in the chaos of those first days, that she had survived. She had gotten those 2 children into the shelter. She had been standing right beside me, but she had gone back out during a lull in the attack to help an elderly neighbor reach safety, and the tower's second collapse had caught her in the open. I read her name on the list 3 times before it settled into me. I did not cry, not right away. I sat very still at my terminal, staring at the letters of her name until they stopped looking like words at all. Grant found me there an hour later and did not ask questions. He simply set a cup of tea beside my hand and left me alone until I was ready to work again. After that, the shipping manifests stopped feeling like abstract numbers to me. Every alloy plate, every new engine component, every young pilot transferred to Site 9 became, in my mind, a small piece of something owed to Lena and to the 40 other names on that list. Fleet Command was not building a single fleet in secret. It was building relationships. I began to see requests moving through diplomatic channels toward species I had never heard mentioned in public briefings. The Orloon cluster, still recovering from a Vrail correction 3 years earlier, quietly agreed to share sensor data along a stretch of contested border. The Sane Assembly, whose outer colonies had suffered under Vrail expansion for over a decade, allowed small numbers of human ships to use their refueling stations, listed publicly only as scientific exchange missions. None of it was an alliance in the way old human history books described alliances. There were no grand treaties, no public announcements. It was quieter than that, built one favor and one shared grievance at a time, threaded together by people like Admiral Whitfield, who understood that trust between wounded species had to be earned slowly, or it would not hold at all. Meanwhile, Speaker Vex grew bolder. Word reached us through sane contacts that the Vrail Assembly had begun pressuring a small independent mining collective near their shared border, demanding access to a rare mineral field under threat of the same corrective action used on New Haven. The miners, having heard what happened to us, surrendered the field without a fight rather than risk their lives. Speaker Vex used the incident in a public address to his own people, which Grant showed me a recording of one evening. Vex stood before a gathering of Vrail officials, his silver-toned skin catching the light, and spoke with the easy confidence of a man who believed he had already won every argument that mattered. The humans made threats, he said, as many young species do when they first taste loss. It has been more than a season now, and there has been nothing, no fleet, no retaliation, only the same trade ships, the same smiling diplomats. This confirms what I told the Outer Circle from the beginning. Humanity postures loudly and yields quietly. We should not fear them. We should simply be patient with their noise, as one is patient with a child. I remember watching that recording with a strange, cold feeling settling into my chest. He was not wrong that we had been quiet. He was wrong about everything else. Grant paused the recording and looked at me. He thinks silence means we've given up, he said. He's about to find out it means something very different. Not long after that recording surfaced, the Vrail Assembly grew even more confident. Reports came in of a second incident, this time against a Seon outpost near the disputed border, where Vrail forces seized a research station under the same excuse of boundary correction. 3 CN scientists were killed in the operation. It was smaller than New Haven, but it followed the exact same pattern, the same casual justification, the same assumption that no one watching would do anything about it. That was when I understood, fully and completely, why humanity had waited. Speaker Vex was not simply a threat to us. He was becoming a threat to everyone along that border, emboldened by every silence he mistook for surrender. Whatever response Fleet Command was building, it would not only be for New Haven, it would be for everyone who had learned to stay quiet out of fear. I was called into a briefing room on the lowest level of Halden Base, on a morning that felt, in every ordinary way, like any other. Grant was already there, along with a dozen officers I recognized from months of manifest reviews and quiet transfers. Admiral Whitfield stood at the front of the room, and when she looked up and saw me enter, something in her expression eased, just slightly, as if she had been expecting me specifically. "Ethan Cole," she said, "you've spent the last several months learning how this fleet was built, piece by piece, without ever knowing the whole shape of it. I think it's time you saw it whole." She activated a display behind her, and for the first time, I saw the true scale of what had been assembled in the shadow of our quiet trade routes and smiling diplomats. Ship counts I had never been shown. Coordinated timelines involving 3 allied species. Intelligence networks stretching further into Vrail territory than I had ever imagined possible. "We are not doing this out of anger," Admiral Whitfield said, echoing words I remembered from that chamber months earlier. "We are doing this because a warning was given, and it was ignored, and more people have suffered because of that choice than just our own. It's time to remind Speaker Vex, and everyone standing behind him, exactly what he was told." She looked directly at me. "I want you aboard the flagship for this operation, Ethan. You were there when the warning was given. I think it's right that you're there when it's kept." I did not hesitate before answering. I thought of Lena pulling children toward the shelter, of the little girl asking when her mother was coming home, of 41 names on a list I had read only once but would never forget. "Yes, Admiral," I said. "I'm ready." She nodded once, and behind her, the display shifted to show a departure countdown, already ticking downward toward a date that had clearly been chosen long before that morning. "Good," she said quietly, "because it's time." The flagship was called Horizon's Edge, and I had never stood on a bridge like it before. Every station hummed with quiet purpose. Officers moved between consoles with the calm precision of people who had trained for this exact moment, for longer than I had known it existed. I found a station near the communications array, close enough to Admiral Whitfield's command chair that I could hear every order she gave. We dropped out of transit at the edge of rail space 3 hours before dawn by their planetary clock, a timing chosen with deliberate care. Grant had explained it to me during the final briefing. We were not launching a surprise attack on civilians. We were striking military assets, the shipyards and command stations that had made New Haven and the Scene outpost possible, at the hour when their defenses would be at their thinnest and their command structure at its slowest to respond. "Discipline," Admiral Whitfield had said in that briefing, her voice carrying to every officer in the room. "We are not here to become what was done to us. We strike exactly what was promised, nothing more, and we do it with precision they will remember." On the main display, the Vrail forward base at Cassandra Station came into view, a sprawling collection of shipyards and defense platforms orbiting a gray, airless moon. It was here that the ships used in the New Haven attack had been built and armed. It was here, according to months of intelligence gathering, that Speaker Vex himself was currently overseeing preparations for a third corrective action, this time against a sane colony 3 times the size of the last. "Signal the Allied fleets," Admiral Whitfield said. "Begin coordinated approach." I watched on my display as 3 separate formations moved into position around Cassandra Station, human ships flanked by Orloon escort vessels and Sane strike craft, all three fleets converging with a precision that could only have come from months of shared planning that none of us in the lower ranks had been allowed to see until that morning. It was strange and moving to watch species who had every reason to distrust each other move together with such trust now, bound by the same grievance, the same quiet promise finally being kept. The first alarms went up on Cassandra Station only 90 seconds before our forward elements reached weapons range. I could hear the confusion in the intercepted communications that flooded through my station, panicked voices switching between military codes and plain speech, officers demanding to know how an approaching fleet of this size had gone completely undetected until it was already upon them. "They never checked their blind spots along the Sayen corridor," Grant said quietly from the station beside mine. "Never thought anyone would use it. Too weak, too primitive, remember?" Admiral Whitfield gave the order, and Horizon's Edge opened fire alongside the rest of the fleet, focused entirely on the defense platforms ringing the shipyards. I watched through the tactical display as precise, coordinated strikes disabled weapon emplacements one by one, methodical rather than wild, each shot chosen to cripple rather than to destroy indiscriminately. Ships that surrendered were left alone. Ships that fought were disabled and boarded rather than obliterated. It did not look like the chaos I remembered from New Haven. It looked like something far more controlled, and somehow that made it more unsettling to watch. A Vril response fleet scrambled from the far side of the station, moving with clear desperation rather than coordinated strategy. I recognized the ship classes from months of intelligence briefings. Older vessels pressed into service because their newer ships had been dispatched elsewhere for the planned Sane operation. They were outnumbered and outmaneuvered from the moment they launched. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission," I called out, catching the signal on my console. "Priority channel, marked for command only." "Patch it through," she said. The voice that came through the speakers was unmistakable, even distorted by static and urgency. Speaker Doran Vex, the smooth confidence gone from his tone entirely, replaced by something closer to disbelief. "This is Speaker Vex, Outer Circle representative, demanding immediate explanation for this unprovoked assault on Vril territory. You will cease fire immediately." Admiral Whitfield rose from her command chair, and I saw something settle over her expression, calm and unshaken, the same look she had worn in that chamber months earlier. "Open a return channel," she said. I did, and for a long moment the bridge was silent except for the low hum of the ship around us. "This is not unprovoked, Speaker Vex," she said. "You were told, in that chamber, that there would be consequences proportional to what was done to New Haven. Cassandra Station built the ships that carried out that attack. This is proportional. This is exactly what you were promised." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that I wondered if the connection had failed. When Speaker Vex spoke again, his voice had changed completely, the easy confidence replaced by something sharper, more careful. "That warning was given 8 months ago," he said. "You did nothing. You traded with us. You smiled at our diplomats. You let us believe." "We let you believe what you already believed," Admiral Whitfield interrupted, her voice still perfectly level. "That patience meant surrender. That silence meant we had forgotten. We told you we would not forget. You chose not to listen." Another explosion lit up the tactical display as one of the last active defense platforms went dark, its weapons disabled rather than destroyed outright, its crew already broadcasting surrender codes on the standard frequency. Around Cassandra Station, more and more Vril vessels began transmitting the same signal, recognizing within minutes of the engagement that this was not a fight they could win. "You cannot hold this position," Speaker Vex said, though the certainty had drained from his voice. "The Outer Circle will respond with the full strength of the Assembly. You will face consequences beyond anything you can imagine." "We are counting on the Outer Circle hearing about this," Admiral Whitfield said. "We want every species watching to understand exactly what happens when a warning from humanity is ignored. This is not the full response, Speaker Vex. This is only the first piece of it, matched precisely to what was done to New Haven. There is more still owed for the Sane outpost, and it will come exactly the same way. Precise, deliberate, and absolutely certain." I watched Speaker Vex's transmission feed flicker on a secondary display, the audio only, but I could hear something in the background of his signal. Other voices, other officers speaking rapidly in Vrail, the sound of a command structure beginning to fracture in real time as the scale of what was happening settled over them. "You said you were not speaking out of anger," Speaker Vex said finally, quieter now, "in that chamber. You said it was simply fact." "It was," Admiral Whitfield said. "It still is. I am not angry with you, Speaker Vex. I am simply keeping a promise. There is a difference, and I think you are only now beginning to understand it." The channel went silent. Around Cassandra Station, the last pockets of resistance were folding one by one, surrender signals lighting up across the tactical display like a slow spreading wave. I sat at my station, watching the shape of the battle resolve itself into something closer to a controlled dismantling than a war, and I thought about the calm certainty in Admiral Whitfield's voice, the same calm certainty she had carried into that chamber 8 months earlier, when nobody but her, it seemed, had truly understood what those quiet words meant. Grant leaned toward me from his station, his eyes still on the display. He laughed at her. He said quietly, "In that room. Do you remember?" I remembered. I remembered every second of it, the rattling sound of Speaker Vex's laughter, the casual certainty in his voice as he explained, almost kindly, why humanity was in no position to speak of consequences. I remembered thinking, even then, that he had misunderstood something fundamental about the people sitting across from him. "He's not laughing now," I said. On the display, the last defense platform around Cassandra Station transmitted its surrender, and the shipyards that had built the weapons used against New Haven fell silent under the watch of 3 Allied fleets working together for the first time in their shared history. It was not the end of anything. Admiral Whitfield had made that clear in her own words only minutes earlier. There was still more owed, still more of the promise left to keep. But for the first time since I had stood in that chamber and listened to Speaker Vex explain, almost gently, why humans were not worth taking seriously, I felt something other than grief settle into the space where that memory lived. It was not triumph exactly. It was something quieter than that. It was the simple, steady feeling of a promise finally being honored, one precise and deliberate step at a time, exactly as it had been given. The campaign that followed Cassandra Station lasted 11 days, though it never once felt like the kind of war I had read about in old history archives. There was no wild chase across Vrail space, no attempt to punish civilian worlds or seize territory beyond what had already been promised. Every target Admiral Whitfield selected traced back directly to something the Vrail Assembly had done, first to New Haven, then to the Scene Outpost, and each response was measured with the same careful precision I had watched aboard Horizon's Edge during that first engagement. I spent most of those 11 days at my station, tracking communications between Vrail command posts as they scrambled to understand what was happening to them. The pattern confused their officers more than the fighting itself. A shipyard would be disabled and its workers evacuated safely before the final strike. A command station would be boarded and its officers taken into careful custody rather than destroyed outright. Time and again, Vrail communications intercepted by our fleet carried the same confused question passed between officers who had expected chaos and found discipline instead. "Why do they only take what was promised?" one officer asked another, in a transmission Grant played for me during a quiet stretch on the 3rd day. "Why do they not simply destroy us while they have the chance?" I did not know the full answer myself until I watched Admiral Whitfield address the bridge crew directly on the 5th day, standing before all of us with the same steady calm she had carried since the chamber meeting so many months earlier. "Every ship in this fleet understands the terms of this operation," she said. "We are not here to become the thing we condemned. Speaker Vex burned a colony because he believed the cost would fall only on us and never on him. We are showing him, and every species watching, that consequences can be certain without being cruel. That is not weakness, it is the entire point." I thought about that a great deal over the following days, especially on the 7th, when our forces intercepted a small Vrail supply convoy near a border checkpoint that had not been part of the original targeting plan. Its escort surrendered almost immediately, overwhelmed and undersupplied, and among the crew taken aboard Horizon's Edge for processing was a young Vrail engineer named Talus Oren, barely more than a cadet, injured during the brief exchange when a support strut collapsed near his station. I was assigned to help with translation during his medical processing, since my knowledge of Vrail trade language, though imperfect, was still useful for the more basic exchanges our medical staff needed. Talus was frightened in a way that had nothing to do with pride or defiance. He kept asking through the translator whether he would be harmed, whether his family back on the outer colonies would be told what happened to him, whether this was how humans treated prisoners. I could have said nothing. I could have let the medical staff handle it and walked away, and no one would have questioned me for it. Not after New Haven, not after Lena's name on that list. There was a version of that moment where I let my grief decide what happened next, where I let this frightened young engineer stand in for everything I had lost. I understood, in that instant, exactly how easy it would have been. Instead, I knelt down near where he sat on the medical table, his injured arm already being treated by our staff, and I told him, as clearly as my imperfect Vrail could manage, that he would not be harmed, that his family would be notified through proper channels, and that this was exactly how humans treated prisoners, because it was the only way we knew how to keep the promises we made. He looked at me for a long moment, confusion and something like disbelief moving across his face. Speaker Vex told us humans were unpredictable, he said finally, that you could not be trusted to act with reason once provoked. Speaker Vex was wrong about a great many things, I told him. That is why we are here. Grant found me afterward, in the corridor outside the medical bay, and did not say anything for a while. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. That's the whole reason for the restraint, he said. Not for them. For us, so that when this is over, we still recognize who we are. Word of how the human fleet was conducting itself spread quickly through the region, carried by Orloon traders and seen diplomats who had watched the campaign unfold from the sidelines. Species that had spent years quietly tolerating Vrail expansion, too afraid to resist alone, began sending careful, cautious inquiries through diplomatic channels, asking whether alliances might be possible, asking what humanity would want in return for support. Admiral Whitfield answered each one the same way, through officers far above my station, but the substance of it filtered down to those of us on the bridge. Humanity did not want tribute or territory. It wanted the Vrail Assembly's aggression stopped, and it wanted every species along that border to be able to trust that a warning given honestly would be honored. The fracture inside the Vrail Assembly itself became impossible to hide by the 9th day. Intercepted transmissions revealed growing dissent among the outer circle, several members openly questioning Speaker Vex's judgment, blaming him directly for provoking a conflict none of them had wanted or expected. One transmission, intercepted from an internal Vrail channel and translated by our staff, captured a senior official demanding to know why Vex had assured the Circle that humanity posed no credible threat, why his confidence had cost them 3 shipyards, a forward command station, and the confidence of nearly every allied trade partner along their border. Speaker Vex's answers, when we could hear them at all, grew shorter and more defensive with each passing day. The smooth, unbothered voice from that chamber meeting had disappeared entirely, replaced by something tighter, more desperate, a man watching the certainty he had built his entire career on collapse in real time. On the 10th day, Admiral Whitfield called me to her ready room, a rare and unexpected summons that left me uncertain what to expect. She was reviewing a data display when I entered, and she did not look up immediately. "You handled the situation with the young engineer well," she said finally. "Grant told me about it." "I only did what felt right, Admiral," I said. She looked up then, and there was something almost gentle in her expression, a softness I had not seen from her since that first day on New Haven, before the sirens, before everything changed. "That's exactly the point, Ethan," she said. "This fleet was not built simply to punish Speaker Vex. It was built to prove that consequences and cruelty are not the same thing. Every officer who understands that, the way you did in that medical bay, is proof the mission is working the way it was meant to." She turned the display toward me, and I saw a formal transmission request from the Vrail Outer Circle, not from Speaker Vex directly, but from 3 other members of the Circle acting jointly, requesting a formal ceasefire and negotiation. "They're not asking Speaker Vex to represent them anymore," she said. "His own people are removing him from these talks." On the 11th day, the Vrail forces still holding position near the outer shipyards transmitted a full stand-down order, broadcast openly across every frequency our fleet monitored. Speaker Vex's voice was notably absent from the transmission. It was delivered instead by a senior Circle member named Halvin Drays, whose tone carried none of the confidence I remembered from that first meeting, only a tired, careful formality. "The Vrail Assembly requests formal cessation of hostilities and proposes terms for negotiated settlement," the transmission read. "We acknowledge the actions taken against the human colony of New Haven and the Sane Research Outpost as violations requiring accountability. We request that further consequence be addressed through formal proceedings rather than continued engagement." Admiral Whitfield listened to the full transmission without interruption, standing at the center of the bridge with her hands clasped behind her back, and when it finished, she turned to the crew with an expression I would remember for the rest of my life, calm, unhurried, and entirely without triumph. "Stand down offensive operations," she said. "Hold defensive positions and prepare formal response. Inform them we accept negotiation, on the condition that Speaker Vex is present to answer for what began this." I felt something settle in my chest as the order went out across the fleet, a strange mixture of relief and something heavier that I did not fully have words for yet. 11 days of precise, deliberate consequence, delivered exactly as promised, had brought the Vrail Assembly not to ruin, but to the negotiating table, exactly where Admiral Whitfield had intended all along. Speaker Vex, I would learn later, had not wanted to attend the formal surrender proceedings at all. It was the Outer Circle itself, humiliated by his miscalculation and desperate to salvage what remained of their standing among neighboring species, that insisted he stand before the same humans he had once dismissed and answer, finally, for the warning he had laughed away. The formal surrender proceedings were held in the same neutral station chamber where the warning had first been given, and I was asked to stand in the same place I had stood 8 months earlier, just behind Admiral Whitfield's shoulder, close enough to hear every word exchanged. It felt strange to walk back into that room. The chairs were the same. The long viewport looking out over open space was the same, but everyone sitting in them had changed in ways that went far deeper than the uniforms they wore. Speaker Vex entered last, flanked by 2 members of the Outer Circle who no longer deferred to him the way they once had. He had lost the easy, unbothered confidence I remembered from our first meeting. His silver-toned skin looked duller under the chamber lights, and when he took his seat across from Admiral Whitfield, he did not meet her eyes right away. Halvin Drays spoke first on behalf of the Circle, formally acknowledging the destruction at New Haven and the Sane Outpost, agreeing to reparations that would help rebuild both, and proposing new boundary agreements that would be independently monitored by a coalition of neutral species going forward. It was thorough, careful, and entirely without the casual dismissal Speaker Vex had once shown toward the very same subjects. When it came time for Speaker Vex to speak, the chamber went quiet in a way that felt different from the tense silence of our first meeting. This was not anticipation. It was something closer to reckoning. "I did not believe you," he said finally, addressing Admiral Whitfield directly. "When you gave your warning, I believed I understood your species completely. I believed patience and silence meant surrender, because that had been true of every other species I encountered. I was wrong, and it cost more than I can fully account for, not only to your people, but to my own." Admiral Whitfield studied him for a long moment before answering. "You were not wrong that we waited, Speaker Vex," she said. "You were wrong about why. We do not act quickly because we are slow to anger. We act carefully because we want to be certain, before we commit to something, that it is exactly what is owed and nothing more. That certainty takes time to build. It is not weakness. It never was." Speaker Vex lowered his head slightly, something I imagine was as close to a formal acknowledgement of fault as his culture allowed in such a setting. "The outer circle has removed me from my position," he said. "I will not represent the Assembly in future dealings with your species, or any other. I only wish to say, before that happened, that I understand now what I did not understand then." I watched Admiral Whitfield's expression carefully, waiting for something like satisfaction to show through, some sign that this moment carried the weight it should have for her, given everything that had led to it. But her face remained steady, calm, the same expression she had worn through every moment of the campaign, through the medical bay conversation I had witnessed with young Talus Oren, through the surrender broadcast on the 11th day. "I don't need you to understand it for my sake, Speaker Vex," she said. "I need every species watching this proceeding to understand it, so that no one else has to learn the same lesson the way New Haven did." The negotiations concluded 3 days later, formal treaties signed not only between humanity and the Vrail Assembly, but among the broader coalition of species that had come together during the campaign, the Orlun Cluster and the Sane Assembly formally joining humanity in a mutual defense arrangement that had begun as scattered, quiet favors months earlier and had grown into something far more lasting. I stood at the edge of the signing ceremony, no longer needed for translation, simply present because Admiral Whitfield had asked me to be. Afterward, as the delegations began to disperse, a Scene ambassador named Dorith Anvey approached our small group, her posture carrying the careful curiosity of someone still working to understand a species she had only recently come to trust. "I have a question, Admiral, if you will permit it," she said. "Your people waited 8 months after the New Haven attack before responding. We watched that silence and did not know what to make of it. Some among my own people believed you had decided against action entirely. Why did you wait so long, when the wrong done to you was so clear from the very first day?" Admiral Whitfield considered the question carefully before answering, and when she spoke, I understood that she was answering not only for the ambassador, but for every species that would hear of this exchange afterward. "Because a warning means nothing if it is not certain," she said. "If we had acted the moment New Haven was attacked, out of anger, without preparation, without allies, without discipline, we might have caused as much harm as Speaker Vex did, and for far less reason. We waited because we wanted our response to be exactly what we promised, no more and no less, delivered with a precision that left no doubt it was deserved. That takes time to build correctly, but I promise you this, Ambassador Anvey, when humanity gives a warning, we mean every word of it. We simply choose to act only once we are certain we can keep it completely." Ambassador Anvey studied her for a long moment, then inclined her head in a gesture I had come to recognize as deep respect among her people. "Then I understand now why my own government has chosen to stand beside yours," she said. "A warning kept completely is worth more than 100 threats made in anger." I thought of Lena Marsh often in the weeks that followed, as the treaty was formalized and New Haven's rebuilding began under the terms of Vrail reparations. I thought of the little girl in the shelter, now safely reunited with family off-world, who would grow up never having to fear another quiet dismissal of what had happened to her home. I thought of Talus Oren, released back to his family under the terms of the treaty, who I later learned had become one of the first Vrail engineers to volunteer for the new joint monitoring coalition along the border, believing, as he told me in a brief message before he departed, that trust rebuilt honestly was worth more than power held through fear. New Haven's memorial was completed nearly a year after the attack. Built where the old comm tower once stood, 41 names carved into a simple stone wall facing the open sky. I stood before it during the dedication ceremony, Admiral Whitfield beside me, and read Lena's name among the others, feeling something settle in me that was not quite peace, but was close enough to let me finally breathe easily again. "You asked me once if I thought Speaker Vex believed the warning," Admiral Whitfield said quietly, as the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse around us. "Do you remember?" "I remember," I said. "He didn't believe it then," she said, "but every species along that border believes it now. That's what the warning was always for, Ethan, not to satisfy anger, to make sure no one has to learn this lesson twice." I looked out over the rebuilt colony, the new comm tower rising taller and stronger than the one that had fallen, the fields green again, where fire had once burned, and I understood, finally and completely, what Admiral Whitfield had meant that first day in the corridor, when she told me that Speaker Vex did not need to believe her warning right away. He only needed to remember, later, that he had been told. He remembered, and because of that, so did everyone watching. Humanity does not forgive easily, and it does not forget the debts owed to those it has lost, but it also does not act in haste, or in anger, or in cruelty. It waits, and it builds, and it prepares, until the moment it can keep its word completely, and when that moment comes, it keeps it, exactly as promised, so that the next warning given, by us or by anyone standing beside us, will never again be mistaken for something that can simply be ignored. That is the lesson New Haven left behind. Not that humans are quick to anger, but that we are absolute in what we promise, and patient enough to make certain we never promise more than we intend to give, or less than what is owed. Speaker Vex learned it too late. The galaxy, watching closely in the years that followed, made certain it never had to be taught again.